that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine. Hello, everybody. Make sure to walk with rhythm. Today, I have the first book in a trilogy that is set 1 year before the events of the original Dune novel. Now, this trilogy was written before Princess of Dune, which I've already reviewed, but Princess of Dune takes place a year prior to this story. So, non-spoiler wise, what stories can you tell a year before the original novel to Dune? Apparently a lot. The initial setup is that the Emperor Shaddam is making this whole planet, a new planet, but expands the universe, so it's okay. This new planet be like this huge museum to his legacy, to his importance, to his arrogance, to his grandstanding of how amazing and wonderful the Emperor is now. That's very in line for Shaddam, I think. So he does that, and politics and everything. Leto goes, because Duke Leto has to keep up appearances, right? You may not like Shaddam, but it is in his best interest to attend it, because it would look weird if he didn't. That's how the game is played, right? So he goes to that, and then while they're all there, bombs go off, people die, and so it's a thing of, what's that all about? We later on learn about Jackson. No, not the bunny rabbit from the Star Wars Expanded Universe, but this son of somebody from Chom, which I also think is really interesting because Chom has always just been, at least as far as the first novel is concerned, space Amazon. So to actually get to see a more personal, the people within it is interesting. But Jackson is kind of this rogue sort of faction. It's another case of, we have somebody upset with the current state of the universe and wants to change it, radically change it. We had a smaller case of that, where a disgruntled ex-military leader in Princess of Dune, if we're going chronologically, tried to attack the Emperor, but that got stopped relatively easily. It was a big thing, but it was also not a big thing, if that makes sense. Like, in the grand scheme, it's like a hostage situation at a bank. Maybe that's too extreme. I don't know. Like, something is like a big deal, but like after a few days, as long as nobody dies, you kind of forget about it, Like, it's sort of like that, like in the grand scheme of things. This one's a little bit bigger, and I don't know how I'm going to swallow it, because there's so much of this story that I surprisingly enjoyed. But it's also like this takes place a year before the novel, and nobody ever brings this up. Now, it isn't necessarily important to the events of the original Dune novel to mention it, but it's just a little weird, because you have this whole Commonwealth, which is this whole, like, even bigger than the last book, the Princess of Dune. This is a whole, not like a huge rebellion like Star Wars, but like it is a growing movement. Now, it's apparently been this, the people within Chom are part of it, or they were, but they've been trying to like do like slow, like more intricate, not overt moves against the Emperor, like very subtle little chess piece moving goals to eventually take the Emperor down. But Jackson doesn't want to wait. He's impatient. He thinks stuff needs to be done now, so he does very loud and bombastic things to make change within the galaxy. So he bombs the museum. But of course, Leto doesn't approve of that, because while those people may be nobles, they may be arrogant, they may be power hungry, but they're still in it, they're still civilians, so that upsets Leto. Um, but anyway, so that happens, and it's kind of this whole thing of learning more about CHOAM and the people within it, because we didn't really know that much in the original Dune novel, and getting a more personal understanding of those things. We also have Duke Leto eventually goes back to um, his home on Caladan, and Shaddam is super pissed about his museum that he just spent all this money preparing, so he puts a big tax on spice, which of course spice is how in the Dune universe you travel through space, because it's not like Halo, it's not like Star Wars or any other sci-fi where ships can just do that because of the events of the Butlerian Jihad. Everybody needs to have a navigator, right? But navigators see through space using spice. So he ups the tax, which makes it so only the wealthy can really afford it, which is really hurting Shaddam, but he wants to be reimbursed for what was lost to him. But he's making the entire galaxy suffer by doing so. So this also allows for an ulterior drug to be made that people can more readily afford. It doesn't actually help with space navigation, but does help the everyday person that consumes spice that is now being, well, frankly, a lot of people die from lack of spice, so they need something to keep them going. So this Caladan drug gets made, and this is upsetting Leto Atreides because this is on his world, his planet, and this is actually a bigger thing that ties into the whole Commonwealth thing, but I won't get into that without spoilers. So, but everything's kind of interconnected. Like there's a bunch of different plot threads. We follow some people from CHOAM, Jackson, this rebel leader, um, Leto, Jessica sometimes, Shaddam, Fenring again, a little bit of the Baron, but Baron's kind of like being sidelined for a lot of this because, well, you all have your time to shine in the original novel, so you kind of don't matter right now. But he's also, of course, trying to scheme and do stuff like he's trying to work with the CHOAM company because they of course, they always pay their taxes on time, but they also would like some spice that doesn't go through the Emperor's channels because, you know, it's expensive. And if they can get away around that, they will. So there's sort of things going on there as well. Um, and the Emperor is getting more cautious and worrying, and he wants Fenring to find out the culprit soon, you know, and to apprehend him. And Shaddam's also just starting to see threats everywhere, which kind of ties into the original Dune novel because, of course, he wants Leto dead. Now, he's had multiple times where he's kind of been negative toward him, but Leto's always kind of balanced it back out. Um, but I think whatever's going on in this story is finally going to make him just be like, I want, like, I'm imagining by the final book, Shaddam's going to be like, I want Leto dead, which will lead perfectly into the original novel. Um, and Leto's going to also have to grasp with the fact that he's kind of just protected Caladan for a long time. He's just been, I'm Caladan, I make Caladan prosperous, and that's it. But in doing so, by not being ambitious really, by being content with what he has, he's kind of made his house weaker in the eyes of a lot of Lance Rad. And so I think he kind of gains the wrong lesson here because he kind of just go, I need to get more involved with the politics. Which, by accepting, I mean, not that he would have a choice if, you know, Shaddam demands it, but by giving him Arrakis, it gives him that opportunity to, you know, make House Atreides matter more. And then we all know where the original novel leaves with all that. So I think that works rather well. And anyway, basically all the new parts that we learn about with, you know, CHOAM and Jackson and this spice on, or not spice, but this new drug on Caladan and everything with that is really good. I really enjoyed it. It's super fascinating and interesting despite the fact that it takes place a year before the original novel, which that's probably the hardest pill to swallow, but it's really good. So I'm mixed on this because I kind of don't like the placement of this. Like I wish this would have been 2 years ago, and then the Princess of Doom would have been a year ago. But this is where we're at, and what I got of it though is pretty good. The weakest parts is Paul, because his story doesn't really matter until um, the original novel. Of course, we do get some interesting stuff there um, with Paul and his feelings toward his father and his mother's relationship with his father, and that stuff is really interesting. There's some good moments between the family too, which I think is good because Paul's gonna have that stripped away pretty soon. So I think it's good to kind of see how the family dynamic works before it all crashes down. So for that, I do enjoy Paul's sections. It's just like, what do you do with Paul ultimately? Because you know he's gonna be fine. He can't do much because all of his time to shine happens in the original novel. So you're kind of just, you know, it's the biggest problem with the prequel. But I do think they still do a lot of good stuff with Leto and Jessica, and Fenring continues to be one of my favorite things that, you know, I'd even mention, of course, this is written by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, but you know, Fenring was just a dude in the original novel. Like I didn't care about him, but like I love watching or reading about him in these books written by, you know, Frank Herbert, Brian Herbert, and Kevin J. Anderson. So without spoilers, because there's a lot of other stuff I want to mention, but that's about the gist. But it is overall, I think, a solid book, better than I was expecting it to be, and honestly, I like it more than the House trilogy. Although it does have a lot of continuity in there too, where it, like, references a lot of stuff from the House books. So you know, like Leto had a son prior to Paul, and so there's a lot of stuff there where you get a lot of moments where he's like, you know, I cannot let anything happen to Paul. I lost one kid. I will not lose another. And as I said when I read House, the House trilogy, like that makes his entire relationship with Paul so much more powerful, I feel. So I'm really in favor of that in the House books, but you can see my reviews of those books if you want. But overall, solid read, and I do recommend it. The movie's coming out in like March of next year, so if you get your hands on it, you can read this trilogy, you know, like right before, and then read the original novel, and then you're all ready to go for the movie. Now, I would also recommend the House books, but those I feel are weaker than this book actually is. Like I feel this book is stronger than the House books. So, but that's just me. But it does also reference the House books, so there's that. So do with that what you will. But that's my review for you. Hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, show us a ton. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember to always walk with rhythm, or the sandworms will get you. I'm gonna get into spoilers. If you don't want that, then get out of here. All right. So here we go. I got something. Um. So we have Bashir Corona again. This is a Sardaukar guard, and he was in the Princess of Dune book that I reviewed that just came out in October of 2023, or November or something like that. Because I think it was October, but he's here again, and I believe there's a comic with him that takes place like during that spot after everything goes bad on Arrakis in the original Dune novel, but before Paul has everything done with the Freeman and everything, or Fremen, sorry. Um, so I'm interested to see what happens with that guy. I also already mentioned Jackson. So there's this really part where Paul and Duncan, Duncan's helping him learn how to fly like a thopter or whatever. And they travel over, you know, like a lot of Caladan, which is cool to see because Caladan is the place where they started at the beginning of the original Dune novel. So it's cool to see that expanded and explored because, you know, everybody knows Arrakis because that's where the main novel takes place. But it's interesting to expand the universe and see more of his actual world. And there's electric fish that they have to avoid because they're going to try to electrocute them down. At first, I was like, what's this doing in Dune? This feels like Star Wars. But then I thought, this is the same universe with sandworms and in the future a god emperor that is a man and a worm. So some electric fish, when we have electric fish in our world, they may not be as big, but we have electric fish on our world and worms. They're just not that big. So ultimately, I mean, it wasn't like a big deal. It's not like something that they have to constantly worry about because it's in the sea, right? And they have land on Caladan. It's just something that they have to be wary of when they're like fishing and stuff if they go too far out, like sharks. So ultimately, I didn't mind it. I just thought it was weird at first, but then after thinking about it, I'm like, well, giant worms, why can't there be giant fish that can electrocute you? It's not that big of a deal. But, you know, obviously, Paul's going to be fine because prequel. Um, and Jackson's goals are really interesting because, you know, this is the same thing with like the the soldier in the previous story, like he was sick of it, and so is this guy. He's just sick of the way the Imperium's been for decades now, and wants change. And I think it's interesting that the Cho members talk about, like, yeah, we were gonna do that, but we were going to. She, like, his mother talks about, like, I was really hoping that, like, by, like, maybe Jackson's, like, great grandson era, we could have finally been free of the Emperor, but instead he's done this now. So it's interesting that a lot of people are working behind the strings, do really want to get rid of Shaddam because he's just, like, a horrible leader. But at the same time, you know, people try. People try to do this, but the only one who's going to succeed is Paul, and then fall from grace and do Messiah, which, again, I think is really cool how that works out. And I do really like Jackson's motivations in this book. Also, wedding. Leto mentions almost marrying someone, and that upsets Paul because he's like, yeah, I know there was always this rule about, a political marriage someday, but, like, you are mom's and mom is yours. This is wrong and this upsets me, which understandably, that's his mom. It's going to upset him. But it never happened. But also, I don't remember this ever happening in the house books. So is this, I mean, again, there's a 20-year gap there. Is this just something I missed, or did this just never come up? And if so, is this in some short story I missed, or is this going to be a story later? I don't know. But I don't think this is mentioned anywhere in the previous trilogy, so it just kind of comes out of nowhere. I mean, it's not very important. He just kind of mentions, like, yeah, this didn't work out. What are you talking about? What didn't work out? I didn't read that. So it's just a little thing. Also, Jessica chastises him for doing the crazy maneuvers over the ocean with Duncan. And she just goes, well, you never know, Mom. My piloting skills might be very important in the future, you know? And that was a little on the nose, because obviously, the original Dune novel. That was probably the most cringeworthy part of the book, like, because in the original novel, we'll have to, like, drive a thopter through, like, a sandstorm. You remember that? Yeah, like, that was unnecessary. Um, Also, when the people get bombed in the museum, I think it's fascinating. It really helps show the dichotomy between Emperor Shaddam and Leto Atreides, because the Emperor's just, I spent all this money, all this stuff that I built, all this stuff that I made is gone now. My money's lost. What do I do? And Leto's concerned about the people, which is very consistent. Even, he feels guilty over the pilots he brought with him because he had to, fly over. He he feels bad about it because he's like, well, these are, like, my most, these are the really promising, you know, employee of the year, like, servants, and they've been doing super well and been super great, and they wanted to see this, so I decided to bring them along. And then they died, and they wouldn't have died if I didn't bring them along. So he, like, it's just how much that Leto, as this, like, authority figure, cares about the little people, that I just think is great. Also, the big thing here is the Caladan drug. I'm going to mention this now. I didn't want to talk about it in spoilers. So, of course, Leto's upset about this, and he's trying to get to the bottom of it. We find out near the end of the book that this new drug is being created by a Tleilaxu. Again, the Tleilaxu causing problems. Also, I may need to reread Princess of Dune, but that may be what they were doing in Princess of Dune, was kind of setting this up. I don't know. I do remember the Tleilaxu plot kind of seeming pointless, but here's another Tleilaxu doing stuff for, and guess what? He's working with Jackson, because they're trying to use this as a way to fund this rebellion, and using this advantage since the Emperor increased taxes. So I thought that all was brilliant. It made a lot of sense, especially the Tleilaxu's motivation for why he's helping, because, Jackson wants there to be no emperor. He wants independence for every system, for every planet, to just be free to govern as they see fit, and to kind of counsel once in a while, but no big emperor controlling everything. And Shaddam, and the Tleilaxu says, like, of course I want to help. We don't even have a say in the Landsrat. we're not even considered people to most of you. So we want this change, and that makes so much sense for the Tailaxu, because they are looked down upon. There is a lot of bigotry there. So I think that's brilliant. That's like the motivation the Tailaxu has to help Jackson. I think it was wonderful. Also, the Emperor starts to see traitors everywhere, which I kind of already mentioned in a non-spoiler, but it is interesting. I feel like this is a big push for him wanting Leto dead. There's also an interesting moment where Thufor is trying to, teach Paul stuff, and he mentions like the impossible choice. Like, what if in a scenario the Harkonnens have your parents, and you can save your parents, but a city will get, bombed, and you will also die, or you can save your parents, you die in the city. Or sorry, you can save the city, and your parents will die. You can watch it happen, and then you'll die, or you can save yourself and watch as your parents and the city dies. What do you choose? And Paul's like, I choose nothing. I choose another option. And Thufir goes, in this experiment, there is no other option. He says, there's always another way. There's always another possibility. I can figure it out. And he said, these are the only parameters I gave you. What do you choose? Sometimes you have to make impossible choices. And that was a really interesting discussion, which I wonder how that will play out, because I know how the original novel ends. But I wonder how much weight that holds for the following book, Dune Messiah. I guess we'll see when we get there. And that's pretty much it for spoiler-wise. But overall, so much meat to this. I enjoyed this so much more. I didn't know what to expect with the story set 1 year before the original novel, but it works. And I don't know if this will apply to the next two books, because I don't know how well that will play out, but we'll see, I guess. But overall, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this one. This is one of my favorite prequel. I mean, it's not better than the Legends of Dune, the Balerian Jihad trilogy, and it's not better than the Sisterhood of Dune, the Schools of Dune trilogy. Those are peak Kevin J. Anderson, Brian Herbert. Those are literally pretty up there for me in terms of with the actual novel of Dune. Like, those are stellar. House trilogy was okay, but this is a massive bump up from that. Like, I'd say the Schools of Dune, the Legends of Dune, excellent, really, really great. And this has been pretty good, pretty solid, great even, but not excellent. So that's pretty much where I'm going to leave it. Up next, I don't know when I'm uploading this. I might upload this a little bit before other stuff, but I will be getting back into the Star Wars universe with Force Heretic, and then we'll move around with Lady of Caladan in the sequel to this book. So I'll see you then. Until next time, don't get eaten by the worm. Stay safe out there, and walk with the Fremen. Bye-bye.